By 2026, the meaning of home in the UK could change forever. New laws and financial shifts are converging to create what many experts call a perfect storm in housing. From rent hikes to eviction flexibility and rising taxes, every new rule seems to push ordinary people closer to the edge. For families, retirees, and young professionals, the threat is no longer distant. It's sitting right at their doorstep. As the government pushes reforms in the name of progress, millions may soon discover that stability, once taken for granted, is now becoming the most unaffordable luxury of all. Number 1. Rent control revisions. The first major change shaking the housing landscape in 2026 revolves around rent control revisions. For years, rent control policies acted as a safety net, keeping landlords from imposing sudden, steep increases. Now, proposed adjustments could remove annual rent caps and allow landlords to raise prices more freely. This shift means that tenants in areas like London, Manchester, and Birmingham could see rent jumps that outpace their income growth. As property taxes and maintenance costs rise, landlords will pass those expenses directly onto renters. The result could be a new wave of displacement, especially among families already struggling with energy bills and grocery inflation. Experts warn that these revisions will create a ripple effect across the housing chain. Young professionals who rely on stable rent to save for a home deposit may find themselves spending a larger share of their income just to stay housed. The changes could also trigger a competitive scramble for cheaper properties, forcing people to relocate farther from their workplaces. For single tenants or small families, this means longer commutes, higher transport costs, and reduced overall quality of life. The middle-income bracket, often overlooked in policy discussions, may face the hardest blow, as they earn too much for government support, but not enough to absorb rent spikes. Rent control was originally designed to create balance between property owners and renters, but the new rules threaten to disrupt that balance entirely. Without firm limits, landlords will gain more flexibility, yet tenants will lose their security. This could encourage speculative behaviour in the rental market, where properties become short-term profit tools rather than long-term homes. If implemented without strong safeguards, these rent control revisions could push thousands toward homelessness, as even reliable tenants might fail to meet sudden increases. The housing market, once seen as an investment haven, may instead turn into a pressure zone where stability becomes a privilege few can afford. Number 2. Eviction flexibility for landlords. The second major change comes through the new eviction flexibility laws that are expected to reshape the rental market in 2026. These rules will allow landlords to remove tenants more easily by expanding the list of legitimate reasons for eviction, including plans to renovate, sell, or repurpose the property. Previously, tenants enjoyed stronger legal protection, requiring landlords to provide substantial proof or extended notice before eviction. Under the new system, that safety net weakens. Notice periods could shrink from several months to just a few weeks, leaving tenants with little time to find new accommodation. This shift might empower landlords, but for tenants, it creates a sense of constant uncertainty and fear of losing their home overnight. Housing analysts predict that the new eviction rules will widen the gap between power and vulnerability in the rental sector. Landlords may take advantage of these policies to clear out long-term renters in favour of short-term, higher-paying tenants. In competitive markets like London or Bristol, such actions could push rental prices even higher, since each vacancy becomes a new opportunity to reset rent at inflated rates. For working-class families and retirees, the emotional toll of eviction, coupled with financial stress, could be devastating. The result is an environment where renters must constantly remain on edge, saving for potential relocation rather than long-term stability. Supporters of these laws argue they will make property ownership more flexible and reduce bureaucracy for landlords. However, the broader social outcome could be alarming. Without strong tenant protections, the number of forced displacements may rise sharply, contributing to the homelessness crisis already visible across major UK cities. Tenants may hesitate to report poor living conditions or unsafe housing due to fear of eviction retaliation. By 2026, this could transform renting from a manageable option into a precarious gamble, where every lease renewal becomes a test of financial endurance rather than a continuation of home security. Number 3. Housing benefit restructuring. The third major rule set for 2026 focuses on housing benefit restructuring, a move that could quietly yet profoundly impact millions of low and middle income tenants. These changes aim to streamline the benefit system, but critics warn they could result in reduced payouts and longer delays for those relying on assistance to cover rent. For many families already living paycheck to paycheck, even a short disruption in payments can mean eviction notices arriving within weeks. The proposed restructuring may also introduce stricter eligibility checks, making it harder for new applicants to qualify. What appears on paper as an efficiency reform could in reality tighten access to essential housing support, leaving vulnerable people exposed to financial instability. Economists note that these benefit delays could create a chain reaction throughout the housing market. Landlords depending on timely rent from tenants supported by benefits may face missed payments, prompting them to issue warnings or pursue evictions. The ripple effect could stretch from urban centres to rural towns, where employment opportunities are fewer and affordable rentals scarcer. For single parents, disabled individuals, and pensioners, even a small reduction in benefit coverage can translate into impossible choices, whether to pay rent or buy food and medication. These individuals often lack the savings needed to buffer unexpected financial gaps, making them especially susceptible to homelessness when assistance slows down or dries up. Government reports suggest the restructuring is meant to encourage self-sufficiency, yet critics argue it misunderstands the real issue: income inequality and soaring living costs. The housing market's pressure doesn't stem from laziness or mismanagement by tenants, but from systemic mismatches between wages and rent. Without targeted adjustments or emergency safeguards, these benefit reforms could remove the final line of defence for those already on the brink. As 2026 approaches, the combination of higher rents and shrinking support may create a crisis where losing one paycheck or one delayed benefit claim could be enough to push ordinary families into homelessness. Number 4. Council housing cuts. Another rule shaking the foundation of the UK housing market in 2026 focuses on council housing cuts, a change that strikes directly at low-income and vulnerable households. Local authorities across the country are expected to face significant reductions in funding for building and maintaining affordable housing. These cuts will slow down new construction projects while also reducing maintenance on existing public housing estates. With fewer homes being added to the system, the waiting list for council housing will grow longer, and thousands of applicants could remain stuck in temporary accommodation for years. The issue becomes even more severe as inflation drives up construction costs, making it harder for councils to stretch limited budgets. This situation will not only affect those at the bottom of the income ladder, but will also impact the entire rental ecosystem. As public housing becomes scarcer, more people will be pushed into the private rental market, increasing demand and driving prices higher. Private landlords will gain more control over pricing, knowing that fewer affordable alternatives exist. Families who depend on stable council housing will face the impossible challenge of paying market-level rents or relocating far from their communities. Teachers, healthcare workers, and public sector employees, many of whom rely on affordable housing, may find it difficult to live near their workplaces, creating broader economic and social consequences. The ripple effects of council housing cuts could redefine urban life in the UK. As more families are displaced from city centres, social cohesion weakens, and community networks start to break apart. Areas once balanced between income groups may become sharply divided between the wealthy and those barely surviving. Without adequate government intervention, homelessness rates could climb sharply by the end of 2026. The reduction in public housing investment sends a clear message. Affordable living is becoming an endangered concept in modern Britain, and without structural reform, owning or even renting a secure home will soon be beyond reach for millions. Number 5. Energy efficiency mandates. The fifth upcoming rule in 2026 centres on energy efficiency mandates, which aim to make homes greener, but could unintentionally shrink the already fragile rental market. Under these new regulations, landlords will be required to upgrade properties to meet stricter energy performance standards. This includes installing better insulation, eco-friendly heating systems, and double-glazed windows. While the goal is to reduce carbon emissions and energy waste, the cost of these upgrades could be overwhelming for smaller landlords. Many may decide to sell their properties instead of investing thousands of pounds into renovations, which will reduce the supply of available rentals across the UK. Housing experts warn that this rule, though environmentally sound, could create a two-tier housing market. Wealthier landlords or large property companies will easily comply, while independent property owners may exit the market altogether. As a result, tenants will have fewer choices, and competition for remaining homes will intensify. Renters will likely bear part of the cost, as landlords who choose to stay in business raise prices to offset renovation expenses. This change will hit hardest in older cities, where housing stock is outdated and energy inefficient. Tenants living in Victorian or pre-war buildings may face temporary evictions during upgrades or worse, permanent displacement, when landlords decide the costs outweigh the returns. From an environmental perspective, the plan reflects progress. Yet for everyday renters, it could turn sustainability into a financial burden. The push for eco-friendly homes, without accompanying financial support or subsidies, risks making green housing a privilege rather than a norm. If the transition isn't balanced, it could fuel a surge in homelessness, particularly among those living in older, cheaper flats that fail to meet new efficiency standards. What was meant to create a cleaner, fairer future might instead deepen the housing divide, as climate policy collides with economic reality in one of the toughest housing markets in modern UK history. Number 6. Property tax adjustments. The sixth major change coming in 2026 centres on property tax adjustments, a reform that will impact both homeowners and tenants across the UK. The government is expected to revise council tax bands and introduce higher rates for properties in certain zones, particularly urban and high-demand areas. The intention is to balance local budgets and fund public services, but these adjustments will inevitably lead to increased living costs. Homeowners will face steeper annual tax bills, and landlords will likely respond by raising rents to maintain profit margins. This creates a domino effect where tenants already struggling with energy costs and food inflation are forced to pay more just to stay in their current homes. Economists warn that this change could hit middle-class households the hardest, as they fall outside the thresholds for most financial assistance, yet carry growing financial burdens. In many cases, property owners on fixed or modest incomes may be unable to afford the higher taxes, prompting them to sell their homes. This could flood the market with mid-tier properties, while wealthy investors swoop in to buy and convert them into rentals, further tightening the grip of the private rental sector. The tax reform could therefore accelerate the concentration of property ownership into fewer hands, widening the wealth gap and pushing more families into long-term renting. Local governments defend the move as a necessary step to modernise an outdated system, but critics argue it overlooks the real strain on average households. As property-related expenses rise, the dream of home ownership will drift even further away for young buyers, and tenants will face limited options as landlords pass down every additional cost. These adjustments may appear like simple fiscal policy changes, yet their combined impact could reshape the housing landscape. By 2026, property taxes could become another silent driver of homelessness, not through direct eviction, but by gradually making secure housing financially unsustainable for the majority. Number 7. Mortgage rule tightening. The seventh major rule shaping the UK housing market in 2026 focuses on mortgage rule tightening, a policy shift aimed at curbing financial risk, but one that may unintentionally shut many people out of home ownership. Under these new lending standards, banks and mortgage lenders will require higher credit scores, larger deposits, and stricter income verification. The goal is to reduce bad loans and market volatility, yet the outcome could be devastating for first-time buyers. Those who have saved for years may find themselves unable to qualify despite stable employment. With affordability already at its lowest point in decades, this move threatens to trap millions in the rental cycle, unable to move forward toward property ownership. Financial analysts suggest that the new rules could reshape the housing hierarchy, separating those with inherited wealth from those relying solely on earnings. As borrowing becomes harder, demand in the rental market will surge, allowing landlords to push rents even higher. Families that once dreamed of buying modest homes will face endless rejections from lenders, forcing them to renew leases at rising prices. This shift could also discourage younger generations from saving altogether, as the path to ownership feels increasingly out of reach. Over time, this policy risks creating a generation permanently locked out of the property ladder. Renters for life, regardless of hard work or consistency. Supporters argue that tightening mortgage access will prevent another financial crash, but the broader social effects could be severe. Without accessible loans, fewer people will purchase homes, slowing construction and dampening the overall housing economy. Developers may cut back on new projects, worsening the housing shortage. The tighter rules may look responsible on paper, but they ignore a crucial fact. Stability in housing depends on opportunity, not restriction. By 2026, owning a home in the UK could become less a reward for diligence and more a privilege reserved for those already wealthy, deepening the divide between property owners and lifelong tenants. Number 8. Vacancy penalty laws. The eighth major rule expected to reshape the UK housing scene in 2026 revolves around vacancy penalty laws designed to discourage homeowners and investors from leaving properties empty for long periods. These laws will impose heavier taxes and fines on unoccupied homes, especially in urban centres where housing demand is highest. While the idea aims to free up idle properties and tackle shortages, it could create unexpected turbulence in the market. Many small investors who own second homes or inherited properties may struggle to meet the new conditions, forcing them to sell quickly or rent at lower rates just to avoid penalties. This sudden shift could flood the market with listings, driving unpredictable changes in property values and rental patterns. Economists believe the policy could lead to a wave of rapid sales, especially from overseas investors who keep properties vacant as long-term assets. As these homes return to circulation, short-term market dips could appear, followed by renewed instability once buyers with stronger financial backing dominate the scene. Landlords already juggling higher taxes and stricter energy rules may decide that holding property is no longer worth the hassle. This could lead to a thinning of small landlords, consolidating ownership among large corporate investors who can absorb penalties more easily. For ordinary renters, that means less diversity in housing options and potentially higher rents as big players take control of the market. Supporters of vacancy penalties argue that no home should sit empty while thousands face homelessness, and in principle, that is true. Yet without careful calibration, these laws could hurt small property owners who lack the resources to adapt quickly. Some may attempt to rent their properties informally, bypassing regulations and risking legal trouble. Others might offload assets altogether, shrinking long-term rental availability. The intention to promote fairness could backfire, creating chaos in both the rental and ownership markets. By 2026, vacancy penalties could either become a breakthrough in housing reform or another policy that deepens inequality under the banner of good intentions. Number 9. Short-term let regulations. The ninth rule expected in 2026 focuses on short-term let regulations, a major shift targeting platforms like Airbnb, VRBO, and Booking.com. These new restrictions will limit how many days a property can be rented out per year, require mandatory local registration, and enforce stricter safety and tax compliance. The government argues this will restore balance to local communities and curb housing shortages, particularly in tourist hotspots such as London, Edinburgh, and Bath. However, for thousands of small landlords who rely on short-term rentals for income, the change could be financially crippling. Once the rules take effect, many may decide to convert these properties into long-term rentals or sell them entirely, triggering a sudden adjustment across both the tourism and housing sectors. Analysts predict that as short-term profits decline, landlords will attempt to recover losses by increasing long-term rents. This could create a paradox. While the policy aims to improve housing availability, it might actually make renting more expensive for permanent residents. Local economies dependent on tourism may also feel the squeeze, as fewer affordable holiday homes reduce visitor numbers. For many towns, this could mean lost seasonal jobs, reduced spending, and slower recovery in post-pandemic travel markets. The effect will likely differ by region. Urban centres may gain some housing stability, but smaller towns and coastal areas could experience economic downturns if visitor accommodation becomes scarce or overly regulated. Supporters of the reform see it as a victory for fairness, arguing that housing should serve residents first, not tourists. Yet critics warn that over-regulation could discourage investment in property development and limit innovation in hospitality. The balance between community welfare and personal enterprise remains delicate. If enforcement becomes too aggressive, small landlords may find compliance impossible and withdraw from the market altogether. That would leave only large corporations operating under new licensing schemes, consolidating control over both short and long-term rentals. By 2026, short-term let regulations could redefine not only how Britons travel, but also who truly gets to call the UK home. Number 10. Immigration and housing demand. The 10th and perhaps most complex rule shaping the UK housing landscape in 2026 is tied to immigration and housing demand. New immigration regulations are expected to open selective pathways for skilled and essential workers, which could increase population growth in urban regions already facing severe housing shortages. While this policy aims to address labour gaps in sectors like healthcare, logistics, and construction, it brings unintended consequences for the housing market. Every new influx of residents adds pressure to an already overstretched supply, pushing rents higher and intensifying competition for available properties. For those on modest incomes, even a slight surge in demand can make the difference between maintaining a lease or being priced out entirely. Analysts warn that without a parallel investment in affordable housing, this imbalance between supply and demand will continue to worsen. Cities such as London, Birmingham, and Manchester could experience record-high occupancy rates, leaving thousands of low-income workers in shared or overcrowded conditions. As landlords see rising demand, many may raise rents aggressively, knowing that desperate tenants have few alternatives. The ripple effects could also reach smaller towns as displaced urban renters move outward in search of cheaper homes, spreading the affordability crisis nationwide. This pattern risks creating pockets of extreme inequality, where housing becomes a competitive privilege rather than a basic necessity. Government planners argue that the incoming workforce will strengthen the economy and eventually help expand housing development. Yet construction lags far behind demand. Without accelerated building projects and rent stabilisation efforts, these new immigration-linked population increases could stretch local resources beyond capacity. Healthcare, schooling, and transport systems will feel the same strain. The challenge is not immigration itself, but the absence of coordinated housing strategy to absorb population growth responsibly. By 2026, if these pressures remain unchecked, the UK could face a situation where opportunity draws people in. But a lack of affordable housing forces many of them right back out onto the streets. The upcoming housing rules for 2026 paint a clear picture. The UK is entering a new era of housing insecurity. What began as a series of policy adjustments has evolved into a national challenge that touches everyone, from lifelong renters to new homeowners. The combination of higher taxes, tighter lending, and weakened tenant protections could leave thousands struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Even well-intentioned policies, like energy upgrades and vacancy penalties, risk creating unintended victims among middle and lower income citizens. As wages stagnate and rent continues to climb, the divide between those who can afford stability and those who can't will only widen. The future of housing depends on how quickly policymakers, landlords, and citizens respond. Without balanced reforms and affordable development, the phrase homeless crisis may become a defining reality of the next decade. These aren't distant warnings. They are immediate signals of what's already unfolding. If you live in the UK, this affects you directly. Share this video to spread awareness, comment your city to reveal how housing is changing near you, and subscribe for more deep dives into upcoming UK policies. Together, let's stay informed before the next rule decides your future.